Imagine a flightless bird weighing in at over 1,000 pounds or 450 kilograms. Now imagine another flightless bird standing over 13 feet or 4 meters tall. Imagine a pigeon so numerous that a single flock literally darkened the skies over a major city for days on end. Then imagine another pigeon twice the size of a turkey that was more docile and tame than any pet could ever be. As unbelievable as it may seem, all these birds lived and flourished in our recent past, but have now vanished into the abyss of extinction. The one single thread that connects all of these bird species together is that they became extinct as the direct result of human cruelty, greed, carelessness, or indifference. This program profiles some of the most beautiful and distinguished bird species to have ever graced the planet, and tells the story of their untimely and infamous demise. Also presented are some recent actions on the part of various conservation agencies in attempts to save bird species on the very brink of extinction, recasting human beings from the previous role as pillagers and plunderers to stewards and caretakers of planet Earth and its irreplaceable inhabitants.
On the island of Madagascar, which is just off the southern coast of Africa, there is a unique array of species. You will see strange plants that live nowhere else on Earth. And several centuries ago, there was something else that lived nowhere else on Earth. It was a bird. It was a big, big bird. And on account of its size, it was called the elephant bird. So you have a bird that was basically 9 or 10 feet tall, that had the most amazing calf muscles, that couldn't fly, but could run like the clappers through the bush.
The early existence of the elephant bird is foggy. However, by the early 1500s, the island had become a port of call for Dutch, Portuguese, and French merchant sailing vessels, stopping off at the island in search of fresh supplies in their journey from Europe to the Far East. Through the natives they met on the island, sailors found enormous eggs and began carrying back accounts of the island and its native villages. Stories about the eggs and the huge 450-kilogram ostrich-like birds that must have laid them were simply not believed for several decades.
The elephant bird egg was at least 2 to 3 feet in diameter, was at least 1 meter in diameter. One elephant bird egg was the size of 200 chicken eggs. So they were obviously highly prized. They were a delicacy. And one clutch of elephant bird eggs could supply an entire village for several days.
The Dutch and French went on to establish coastal colonies on Madagascar as early as 1509. However, there was very little contact with the interior of the island, as it was densely populated by the native Malagasy people, who violently resisted colonization. As a result, the interior of the island was not exposed to Europeans for more than 150 years, such that the Europeans had little influence on the fate of the elephant bird. In reality, the demise of the bird came as a result of predation and habitat destruction by the native Malagasy people.
Madagascar apparently was first colonized by natives, Malagasy people coming in from the mainland about 1,000 years ago. In that time, they brought to extinction a whole variety of animal species, plant species, by burning the forest, cutting down the forest, killing the animals, and the elephant bird was the largest of those animals.
In Madagascar, a country that I know particularly well, the entire central region, almost 80% of the island, had an extensive forest system, which would be tropical forest system, as early as 1,000 years ago. It was complete with animals that we've never seen before. All of them are now gone. In fact, it's gone so much that we have no idea what the plants must have looked like, and we have only skeletons of what the animals look like. Now that's 85% of an entire island gone within our humanity's appearance on that island.
In addition, evidence shows that the adult birds themselves were more than a formidable opponent to the native hunters and were rarely killed. Their eggs, however, suffered from massive overhunting. By the mid-1600s, the elephant bird retreated to the most inaccessible parts of the island and was rapidly dwindling in numbers.
It is alleged that the bird existed until the early 1700s. And indeed, even today, you can go to beaches on the island of Madagascar and find fragments of the elephant bird shell.
So apparently, the downfall of the elephant bird was that they were not hunted to extinction. They were fried, scrambled, poached, and omeletted to extinction.
No haven proved safe enough for the elephant bird, despite the size of the island, nearly 2,000 kilometers in length. By 1720, the elephant bird was extinct. Just as the Western world was learning of the existence of this magnificent creature, the heaviest bird that ever walked the earth vanished forever. The true economic loss of the elephant bird as a resource to humanity is only now being realized in view of the recent establishment of highly profitable ostrich farming and the medical findings that ostrich meat is far healthier than red meat. Humanity as a species would certainly be better off now had a bird species the size and weight of cattle, with the ability to reproduce a dozen at a time, been available as a food resource in much the same way as ostriches are today. Sadly, the elephant bird was not unique in the history of giant flightless bird extinctions. Halfway around the world, on an even larger island, the same scenario played itself out. In the grasslands and tropical forests of New Zealand, standing at least 4 meters tall and weighing in at over 300 kilograms, lived the moa. This running bird existed in extraordinary numbers and variety, with as many as 12 species living throughout the entire island. Historical records show that peoples from neighboring Polynesian islands colonized New Zealand roughly 1,000 years ago and became known as the Maoris. The Polynesian colonists were an active and aggressive people who soon became a moa hunting culture. For the first time in millions of years, predators roamed the island. The impact was nothing less than catastrophic.
It was a very dangerous bird, probably, to attack. And so part of their rituals maybe of having their youth go out and like in Africa after lions, some of the natives there would the passage of youth into the culture, showing the bravehood of attacking these strong animals. That moa had to be some fierce animal to face.
News of the giant birds was slow in reaching Europe. Since New Zealand was only recently colonized by Europeans, written sightings of moas by non-Maoris were few and far between. It was not until 1838, when the fragment of a huge leg bone was brought to a museum in London, that scientific circles took notice of the moas. Even so, years passed before scientists were convinced that the moas existed. Meanwhile, aggressive, unlimited hunting dwindled moa numbers.
When the Maoris landed, colonized the island, they began to it was almost a sport to bring down the moas. And so they rapidly decreased in number due to direct hunting as well as consumption of their eggs. Now, New Zealand was a big island, so they retreated further and further, but eventually the pressure became too great.
Just as the world was becoming aware of the existence of the moa, they too disappeared into the abyss of extinction. No sightings of the world's tallest bird were reported after 1850. While the moa passed off the scene relatively unknown, another unfortunate victim of extinction remains very well known even today. In fact, as popular as this bird is, you might think of it as the celebrity of all birds, the dodo.
Many people who otherwise wouldn't know about extinct animals have heard of the dodo. We all know the expression, as dead as the dodo. The dodo itself, indeed, was a pigeon. It was a large pigeon, and it was a flightless pigeon. And it was only found on the island of Mauritius, which is a fairly large island in the Indian Ocean, just off the coast of southern Africa.
The theory is that a small group of pigeons flying, migrating, got blown off course and landed 600 miles off course, landed on Mauritius Island. There were trees, there were plants, there were bushes of all kinds from the seed dispersion into the wind. So you had a tropical paradise of trees, plants, food, sunshine, and nothing else.
These pigeon-like birds found themselves stranded on a deserted island with nothing to do except eat and reproduce. Exposed to millions of generations of such a lifestyle, the descendants of the 1-pound pigeon-sized birds not only lost the ability to fly, but fed to the point that they grew in size, resembling large turkeys rather than pigeons. Alone in their island paradise, the dodo bird flourished.
We find island birds, island animals, to be very, very vulnerable. They have no predators, and over the millions of years of adaptation to an environment without fear of predation, they didn't have fear of anything.
Although it is suspected Mauritius Island was visited by Arab traders in the 1300s and 1400s, no human settlements or accounts of visitors appeared until the 1500s. Portuguese sailors, confined to meager rations for months on end, were suddenly greeted shoreline by thousands of perfectly well-mannered dodos.
They saw these allegedly waddling birds. They would come straight up to them. Easy game. And these sailors probably hadn't had fresh meat for months. What better? Bang, club on the head. Easy pickings. Mac dodo, let's do it.
Despite this wholesale killing by countless European sailing ships, the dodo survived and even prospered in the more inaccessible hilly parts of the island.
What really killed off the dodo birds were when the French, Dutch, Portuguese established settlements on the island, established coastal settlements on the island.
Not only did the Portuguese and Dutch sailors eat the birds, they also brought a number of animals along to the islands as well. Their dogs, their cats, and of course those stowaways that occur on every ship, the rats. And they would come, they would eat and attack perhaps the adult birds, but also the eggs and the chicks. So within a fairly short period of time, probably a period of about half a century or so, the dodo was actually wiped out, never to return. It is said to have become extinct around about 1680, but no one knows for sure.
The dodo bird was the most docile, the most tame, the most well-mannered bird of any bird that ever lived on this planet. Okay? If any society could have wanted to look for a domesticated bird for food supplies, for its dinner tables, the dodo bird would have been the perfect bird.
It's fairly wasteful and dangerous for us as a species to be throwing away resources. And that's basically what we do when we throw away the dodo bird. Look at how many years it's and billions of dollars it's taken us to domesticate the common turkey. Here we had a dodo bird, larger, very docile, very tame, probably would propagate very quickly given the right foods. We threw that resource away.
If ever there was an unlikely candidate for extinction, it would have been the passenger pigeon. The sheer number of these birds led American hunters of the 1800s to believe that an inexhaustible resource capable of surviving relentless and unprecedented pressures on its population was at their disposal.
Just to give you an idea of how many passenger pigeons there were. In the early 1800s, 40% of the entire bird population in the northern American hemisphere was passenger pigeons. That's how numerous they were. Even as late as 1870, there was one single flock of passenger pigeons passing over Cincinnati that was estimated to be at least 2 billion birds.
These billions of birds that used to fly for 100 flocks, hundreds of miles wide and hundreds of miles long, that would take hours and hours and half a day to pass overhead.
The passenger pigeon's habitat comprised the whole of forested North America, although they tended to stay east of the Mississippi River. They fed on acorns and nuts of hardwood forests, as well as the seeds of coniferous woodlands. Grains, grass seeds, berries, and insects were also staples of the bird's diet. One nesting flock alone was capable of consuming well over 100,000 tons of seeds in a single day.
And the passenger pigeons evidently had a pretty specialized way of following these major food supplies. They would move northward, tracking the retreating snows and finding the previous fall's crops of acorns, beech nuts, and so on. And it took a lot of birds moving in a broad front to locate these areas of abundance, and then they would all move in and breed in huge numbers, communal or in a large colony.
A phenomenal demand for the birds grew throughout the early to mid-1800s. Adult birds, although a cheap meat source, were considered a tender delicacy. The bird's organs and other body parts were sold as medicines and cures for numerous ailments.
Then they would hunt them and capture huge amounts of passenger pigeons to use for shooting clubs that were in Boston and New York and Chicago that was very popular. And that's in fact where you get the term clay pigeon for skeet shooting. Is in the 1800s, they caught and used real pigeons and released them for the sport shooting. And there were reports that up to 50,000, 100,000 birds a day would be used by all of the shooting clubs along the East Coast.
I think the passenger pigeon is sort of indicative of the view that must have been prevalent back in the 1700s through much of the 1800s, that the abundance of wildlife in North America was limitless, and that going out and killing tens of thousands of passenger pigeons in a short period, the connection didn't seem to have been made that over time this could be very destructive to the species. And I think there's probably even a less of a connection with the effects of habitat destruction. It just wasn't thought about. We were busy having progress march westward and march forward.
Another related thing is that we have to remember that sometimes these animals are also viewed as competitors. And the passenger pigeons certainly did eat grain. So, in addition to serving as a food source for North Americans, hunting them also resulted in a decrease in the amount of green crops that were lost. So there was no motivation really to try and protect the passenger pigeon. It was numerous and it seemed plentiful.
Once the combination of habitat destruction and market hunting got them to a certain low number, and that low number may still have been in the many hundreds of thousands, they were pretty much doomed to extinction just because of their specialized way of finding food.
The last passenger pigeon that lived died in Cincinnati Zoo on the 1st of September in 1914. From the early 1800s, in a period of less than 100 years, we caused the extinction of a bird that must have numbered in the tens of billions.
So it was that the legacy of the most numerous bird to have ever lived ended in a zoo in 1914. Birds don't have to be dependent upon forests or land or even be palatable to be prone to the dangers of extinction. Take, for example, the case of the great auk that lived in vast numbers in the North Atlantic, with populations estimated in the tens of millions. The great auk was the original penguin, which means white head in Welsh. Modern-day penguins of the southern hemisphere derived their name from European sailors who recognized the similarities between them and the great auk.
The great auk was, of course, a large flightless seabird of the North Atlantic Ocean, which, like all seabirds, had to come ashore to islands to nest. Being flightless, at least through air, they're very good at propelling themselves underwater. They can't escape land-based predators, and so the integrity of their nesting islands is what allowed this species to exist.
The first recorded killings of the great auks off Newfoundland were in 1497 at the hand of French sailors in search of fresh supplies on their fishing voyages. The docile nature of the auks, owing to the fact that their North Atlantic island nesting areas had been isolated for millions of years, allowed the birds to be easily taken in huge numbers. It became unnecessary to stock merchant and fishing vessels with food for the duration of their voyages, since numerous auks were available to resupply the ships, even though sailors' logs noted how badly the birds tasted.
Certainly at about 1760 or 1770, there was a tremendous demand for colonial supplies of mattresses, of feather, of pillows, of various things requiring feathers. Consequently,
The feather merchants deployed hundreds of crews to the great auk nesting grounds to establish a feather-gathering industry on the islands. By 1810, only one rookery remained in the West Atlantic.
There were millions of auks that were all hunted, and they were killed and thrown into boiling cauldrons where the feathers were removed, and they didn't even eat the birds. The birds were not even eaten. The feathers were taken off and scooped up, and then the bodies were thrown away.
And this led to an extremely rapid demise of this seabird. The last known two individuals were killed in 1844 on an island in the North Atlantic from Iceland. And the specimen of the great auk that we have here at this museum is thought perhaps to be one of those last two individuals that were killed in 1844.
On June 3, 1844, on a small island off the coast of Iceland, the legacy of the gentle great auk, the only northern hemisphere penguin, came to an end. So many extinctions, and so many more, both known and unknown. What can this mean for the future of a planet that thrives as a result of its coexistence and interdependence on its inhabitants' species?
It is a conservative guess that well before the middle of the next century, we will leave our children on a barren planet devoid of perhaps 2 million species of plants and animals. It will be a simple, barren world of starving humans and fat cockroaches, rats, mosquitoes, and so forth. At that point, there will be no turning back from this hellish abyss. Life as our species now knows it may well be over.
The agents that have caused these species to become extinct, whether it's direct habitat destruction or the more subtle effects of habitat fragmentation, or the introduction of exotic flora or perhaps exotic mammalian predators and so on. All of these agents that might have caused the extinction of certain species are on their way toward causing the decline and potential extinction of many, many others.
The case of the dodo bird and its tropical forest habitat on Mauritius Island represent the perfect example of this domino effect of one species going extinct, then directly causing the extinction of other species. Over the period of tens of millions of years, the dodo bird and several tree species evolved together and intertwined their existence. Various tree species produced seeds that were in a hard shell casing that only the dodo birds were able to crack and allow the seeds to germinate in their digestive system.
With the extinction of the dodo bird 300 and some years ago, there has been no new trees that have been growing on that island. And there's only 1 or 2 specimens of a variety of species that are left that are over 400 years old. And so those tree species are essentially extinct because the dodo bird and this tree species evolved hand in hand.
Perhaps, just perhaps, if we can save the largest, most visible species, we can save some of their habitats. And with them, tens of thousands of less conspicuous but essential species will be saved as well. It is as if we could prevent the largest dominoes from toppling, we may spare the myriads of smaller dominoes as well.
I attended a conference a few years ago and was intrigued by one of the attendees that says there's never going to be a shortage of endangered species. Our jobs are all insured. And I thought about that, and it's basically true. There are more because of the human populace expanding, because of our greater technology to utilize in more efficient ways the environment in ways we never thought of just 10 years ago.
Who knows what could be in the forest or that might be of use to us that we don't even know. That could cure AIDS, that could cure diseases, that could cure Alzheimer's. All these things are possibilities, but we have to be able to have these saved and protected.
If we can just try to keep up with those solutions, which is taking resources to provide programs, to provide scientists to go in and look at these species. At the same time that they're studying them, they could be finding, and are finding, ways to exploit a species a little better for ourselves, but also to more efficiently manage these species in the wild.
While we can never revive bird species that are now gone, forever precluding our use of their benefits as resources for humanity, we are now learning from our past mistakes. The majestic California condor may well have met an ending similar to the elephant bird, dodo bird, and passenger pigeon, if it were not for an aggressive and novel conservation effort. The California condor is a large vulture with the greatest wingspan of any bird, over 10 feet wingtip to wingtip. It feeds on carrion, or dead animals, in the forests of southern and central California. For dozens of years, the California condor has been on the short end of several developments, including a tremendous reduction of its habitat by the expansion of cities and towns, overhunting by trophy enthusiasts, egg collecting, poisoning by DDT spraying, and lead contamination as they fed on animals shot and killed by hunters.
The condor is a very visible symbol because of its size, and it is magnificent to be out in the wild and see a condor flying over. And I think because of its symbolism, there was motivation to try and prevent its extinction.
The California condor came very close to extinction in the 1980s. By 1985, after a decade-long study, conservationists realized they couldn't ensure their safety in the wild. It was therefore decided to pull the animals out from the wild, collect as many eggs as possible, and establish a captive breeding program.
The second to the last egg that was retrieved in the wild was laced with DDT and was crushed immediately as the parent sat on it. The same syndrome that occurred with peregrine falcons and pelicans and other species that had trouble with the DDT era. We realized with these problems that the bird couldn't be protected in the wild. The hope at the time was that the wild population could be better understood, remedies could be found to circumvent the problems they were incurring.
But there was criticism of this effort by Native Americans and some conservation groups who argued that no species had ever been brought entirely into captivity and successfully released back into the wild. However, extensive experience with the Andean condor in South America proved otherwise.
And it actually took us over a year to settle many of the disputes and the court cases that have evolved from that decision. By bringing all the birds in, the remaining 14 birds or 13 birds, we already had an adult in captivity. We ended up with 27 birds with 14 founding lines. Between the San Diego Wild Animal Park and the Los Angeles Zoo, this population was divided evenly as best we could between the genetics, the sex, the ages of the birds, and that was the flock, the core flock we began with to try and build the current population.
When we were talking about bringing condors into captivity for breeding, it was a real challenge because we had never tried to breed California condors before. We wanted to get offspring from each of those birds because all of the subsequent populations would stem from these 14 birds. So the work we've done here was very frustrating at first because we didn't know the answers.
The huge gamble paid off almost immediately. By 1988 and again in 1989, the first breeding pair in captivity produced a healthy chick. There are now 16 breeding pairs. Within a decade, the California condor has gone from 27 to 145 birds, over a 5-fold increase in population. At present, several condors have even been released back into a California state game reserve. Through research and education, increasing awareness of the effect of our actions on species other than ourselves is fostering an appreciation for nature, habitat, and the plight of species on the brink of extinction. It's now up to humans, as caretakers of planet Earth, to preserve and protect these unique species with whom we share our world.
We will need to, in the future, be managing or thinking about managing everything on Earth. If it is to survive, if we are to survive. In the process, we need to understand these populations, these ecological communities, as best we can if we're to protect them.
We cannot know which creature lost is the one that sets in motion an irreversible avalanche of species extinction that eventually reaches humankind and extends to its unthinkable conclusion. Our support of efforts to preserve the extraordinary creatures we have among us is both prudent and necessary.
And in the end, we're really protecting ourselves. We need these populations. We need the ecology as much as they do. And without it, we're a doomed species as well.